Hello there and welcome back to another video here on Wristwatch Revival. I'm Marshall. I'm going to be guiding you through today's video. Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me for a little bit. This time on the bench, we've got a sweet watch. This is a Seiko 6105. This one's mine. I actually bought it off of eBay maybe 6-7 years ago, something like that. And yeah, this is a Captain Willard, as they're known. It's one of the most iconic Seiko watches ever made. This is also the first watch I ever fixed anything on. I actually replaced the crystal on this watch. I was very proud of myself at the time for putting the new crystal on. But as you can see, it's in great shape. This is called the Captain Willard because it's named after the main character in the 1979 film Apocalypse Now, Captain Benjamin Willard, played by Martin Sheen. And he basically wears the watch for the whole movie. The watch was produced from 1968 to 1977, and it was sold in Asia during the Vietnam conflict and was very popular with American soldiers, many of whom went as far as wearing it in combat, even though they weren't Army-issued watches, which were known to fail in the harsh environment of Vietnam. Since then, it's become iconic. It's valuable, for multiple reasons, including the design and its association with the movie and the era that it was made in. But for us, let's get this thing on the bench because I bought this off of eBay years ago. And I never have serviced it. I never knew how until now. So I figured, well, let's give it a service. And it looks like it actually needs one pretty badly. There's a decent chance it hadn't been serviced in years since when I bought it. And as you can see, the amplitude was fairly low there. And it was losing actually a lot of time, almost a minute a day. So first things first, let's get this case back off. This is a dive watch for the era. Important to remember that dive watches, even if they were meant to be a dive watch back then, may not be a dive watch now. You really want to make sure that your vintage watch is checked and make sure that they're actually waterproof before taking them in the pool or out in the ocean. But in the meantime, we do need to get the case back off, and it's a pretty secure case back. So I'm going to use my case back removal tool here. This is actually a Chinese version of a Bergen tool, expensive Swiss one that I bought quite a while ago, and I haven't really felt the urge to replace it yet. I don't have to use it too often, and this one's reasonably made, so I've stuck with it. I figure if it breaks, I'll save up and get the Bergen one next, so that I don't have to ever buy another one again because it looks like it's really well made. But this one's actually pretty decent, and as you can see, it works well. I haven't had any issues with it. So there comes the case back. It's kind of a weird tool to use, but it does work well. So now that we've got the case back off, we can get into the movement here and see what's going on. Oh, there it is. Seiko Time Corp, it says on the inside of the case back. This is an automatic watch. That's another bonus, for heavy use, whether it's in the military or not. You just wear the thing all the time and you don't have to ever wind it. It has a locking crown as well so that it doesn't get knocked loose. And as you can see, a rather pronounced crown guard down there as well. It's kind of one of the design features of the watch that really stands out and makes it kind of unique. So we'll take the crown out first. And yeah, this thing just needs a good service. Try to get those numbers up on the time grapher. I have to say this watch is really comfortable on the wrist as well. If you've ever had a chance to wear one with all the kind of rounded edges and such, it's very soft. It's extremely legible. As you can see, I mean, there really isn't much to it. It does have a date function on it. That's kind of the only complication besides time. I'm going to use my hand levers to remove the hands. These hands are a little bit worn, but not enough for me to actually do anything about. I'm happy to keep it in original condition. One of the hands fell off of my casing cushion there. The dial on this particular one is really in remarkably good condition. A lot of these watches saw a lot of heavy use in Vietnam or elsewhere, and they're kind of meant to be worn and beaten up a little bit. I'm going to start by taking off the automatic rotor. So when that part spins, that's what actually winds the watch as you walk around or move your hands. That part right there, it's a weighted rotor. It's weighted on the outside so that it kind of flips around on that pivot. Now we need to take the dial off. To remove the crown and the stem here, this one actually has one of those little spring-loaded pushers that you push down rather than the screw for the setting lever that you'll see on most of the watches that I work on. This, of course, is a movement made by Seiko in Japan. And there's always a few little differences, between Swiss watches and Japanese watches. And you'll even see some differences if you go back to American watches, or German watches have certain design elements that they tend to stick to. Not 100%, but you'll see little differences. And there's the dial coming off. And this is like a plastic ring that looks like it's broken, but I don't know. It doesn't really have that important of a job, so I'm just going to try to keep it together and not let it break any further. And there's that beautiful dial. It really is in great shape. It's hard to find them like that. I feel like I got lucky with that one. Now you can see the calendar works here. And as you can see, there's kind of a large cover plate that covers up the motion works and the calendar works kind of all at once. So I'm going to start by removing that. This is my first time working on this watch. It might be my first Seiko. Maybe I've tried another one. I don't know. You can see also somebody engraved the number 6105 on that plate. And it looks like I may have forgotten a screw here. Now I'll try to remove this plate again and then realize I forgot another screw. Probably want to take that off before taking off the plate. And there we go. That looks pretty clean, if perhaps a bit dry. And now we can get a look at what's going on with the calendar works underneath here. So we can take this calendar ring off first. Try to be careful with that just because it has printing on it. And that little spring, I just was like, oh, where did that go again? Because, you kind of commit these things to your brain as you go through and take apart a watch, especially if it's the first time working on a movement. I'll tell you, there aren't as many movements out in the world than you think when you first start working on watches. And the similarities between many of them are very, very strong as well. But still, there's little tricks to every movement. There's little tiny things that you need to learn about each one before you get really comfortable with taking it apart and putting it back together. And since this is my first time on this movement, it requires a little extra poking, prodding, and thinking when I'm actually doing the disassembly. And then I can get a better idea of how it'll go back together. Interestingly, Seiko uses plastic parts occasionally. This is one of them. I honestly have no idea why they use plastic parts. It's really frowned upon from the Swiss side, but they must have really figured that those parts needed to be plastic or something, because, your first thought would be that it would be like a cost-saving exercise. And that might be part of it, but they only use them on very specific parts in the calendar works. It's not like they're going around the movement looking for parts to turn into plastic. It's just a couple of little wheels that go on the calendar for some reason. Here's my cannon pinion remover to take the cannon pinion off. Nice and easy. That remover is great. It pulls the cannon pinion directly upward so that there's no bending or tweaking on that post, which is, well, it's actually a pinion from one of the wheels. So you really don't want to be working that sideways. Again, I'm just kind of taking a close look at each of the pieces here as I take them apart. Look at this weird calendar thing with this spring-loaded thing. Pretty sure that's what kicks the calendar over when it goes. All right, so now we've got that part mostly disassembled, we can switch our attention back over to the other side of the watch where the gear train and the automatic works and all that kind of stuff is. The first thing I usually like to do, that's right, take off the balance. Why do I do that? Generally speaking, just to protect the thing. Easily the most delicate part on the watch. There's two really, really delicate things with the balance. There's the pivots, which are tiny and very breakable and susceptible to that. And then there's the the balance spring, which is also, it's also called the hairspring. It is absolutely thin and tiny and can be damaged quite easily. So, being somebody who's still learning this craft very, very much and trying to improve, I like to just get that thing out of the way so that if I slip with a screwdriver or put my finger in the wrong spot or whatever, I won't have to deal with a disaster. Plus, it's got to come out anyway. So, why not take it out first? There's really no upside to leaving it in. So now we're going to take the automatic bridge off, and it kind of pops off because it's held under a little bit of tension. We'll take that part apart later. But the way that Seiko has designed these automatic works is genius. Seriously, just an absolute work of genius. It's so simple, yet it does exactly what you want. The key is that you need that rotor when it turns around. The ideal situation is where it'll wind up the watch, whether that rotor turns clockwise or counterclockwise. And they have that here, and it works beautifully. And I'll show you that when I take it apart. In the meantime, we can keep going deeper into this thing. You can see I took off the crown wheel, ratchet wheel there. And that means that I can actually take off this big bridge. And again, on a lot of the watches that I work on, the barrel bridge will not cover as much ground as this particular barrel bridge does. As you can see when I take it off, that it actually covers most of the train of wheels as well. So it's kind of a combo bridge. These are sometimes called a 3/4 plate. I don't know if this technically counts as a 3/4 plate, but this is a bridge that's responsible for a lot more pivots than normal. As you can see, the whole train of wheels is basically exposed there outside of the escape wheel. And that stick right there that I'm figuring out, that's actually the click. And I have to say, it looks cheap. It just looks like a little post of metal. That is all it is. But that is the click and the click spring together. And it's another, I'm telling you, the ingenuity that went into this watch, especially for the time frame, late 60s, early 70s, is just so impressive to me. It's just looking at things in a different way and solving problems in a different way. I don't know that it's better or worse, but it is awesome how they figured that out. Oh, and by the way, I didn't mean the escape wheel. I meant actually the pallet forks was the only thing that wasn't covered by that bridge there. As you can see, the escape wheel kind of hanging out as I start to take out the train of wheels. That right there is called a hack. And what that does is when you pull the crown out to set the time, it stops the watch from running so that you can set it to a very specific, right to the second. And that can be very important. Interestingly, even though this isn't technically a military watch, that can actually be important in military applications. You can synchronize your watch with somebody else so that you make sure that you're going off at the same time. So digging a bit deeper here, there goes the escape wheel. I'm just taking a look at it again, just trying to figure out how this thing goes back together or if there's anything different that I need to keep my eye out on. I want to take that main wheel out there, but it's kind of getting blocked. So I figure, well, let's just continue the path here and take out the pallet forks. Yeah, these watches have become very popular. They've actually gone up in value a lot. I think I paid $500 or $600 for this watch, and now I think they're going for somewhere around double that. I've considered selling it a few times, but ultimately, it's such a nice watch to just pick up and put on. Like it just never gives you any fuss. It's really comfortable. It wears beautifully. It's just kind of one of those watches that's really nice to have in the watch box, just to take out when you're just gonna, when you don't want to have to think about it. And I really like watches like that. In fact, a lot of my watches are like that. All right, now we've got the pallet forks out and we're almost done with disassembly. And I have to say, even though this has calendar and it's an automatic, that wasn't so bad. I haven't, it's funny when you take on this hobby, there sometimes does come a point where you get into a watch and you start to get that feeling in your stomach like I maybe have gone too far. Like I am not good enough to do the things I'm doing right now. And this one had me a little tiny bit of that, but not enough to really scare me off. I thought, you know what? I can do this. So that's kind of the intermediate wheel for setting the time and the calendar. It has a quick set calendar and the wheel to set the hands built into one. And now there's a very large and kind of complicated but cool spring here. It's also a cover plate. This is the setting lever spring. But it also has that large flat section near the back of it there. And that's the thing that you're pushing down on for the setting lever to release the crown from it. That's the spring that holds that in place. So that acts as a cover and two different springs. So another just really great design, right? Like just a well thought out part that covers multiple uses at once. And as we've learned in the past, the yoke spring must be taken out carefully. It's actually quite a beefy spring for a watch, and it gets loaded up and it'll go flying. And you can get some real distance on it too. There's the yoke. And since this setting lever doesn't have a screw on the other side because it's one of the kind with a spring, you can actually just pull it straight out of the hole. Like that. Easy, easy. And as you can see, there's a ton of oil sitting underneath it. It looks like this watch may have been over-oiled at some time in the past. You really shouldn't see a pool of oil like that. And on top of that, this thing hasn't been serviced in minimum since I bought it. And that's already been past, when I would normally want to service it. And likely it hasn't been serviced in a much longer time than that. So having that much oil left over really does signify that there's quite a bit. Now, what I'm doing here is putting the balance back on the main plate. And you might be thinking, well, why? You just took it off. And the answer is I like to clean the main plate and the balance together. This way, the balance isn't just flying around and can't get caught up in other things because it's protected by the balance bridge there. Then I'll take off the shock jewels on the top and bottom later on during the cleaning process and clean those individually and manually. And I find that that's a better way to get them clean anyway than putting them through the watch cleaning machine. So the last thing I need to do is take apart this mainspring barrel. And it actually goes kind of backwards from how the Swiss ones do. And as you can see, yuck. Somebody put, I don't know what in this, but a ton of something. And this is not good. When you have this much lubricant in there, it leaves a lot more to break down, which means that it actually gets, much, much worse over time. And B, it attracts dirt. Like that much lubricant will actually hold dirt or any type of dust or anything in there. So that has got to go. That is way, way, way too much in there. Maybe, WD-40 or something. And this spring is kind of a mess as a result. I can't hardly even get a grip on it. And it doesn't really want to come out either. Normally these just kind of unfold. You can see how dirty my finger cuts are getting too. That is exactly what you don't want to happen. So it unwound all at once and sent the barrel flying across the room. Thankfully it's huge, so it's not hard to find, but look at all the grease in there. That is way, way, way too much grease. Now the last thing to do before we put this thing in the cleaning machine is to take apart this automatic works. And it is so simple. It's got these hand things called pawls or a pawl something. And all it does is they're different sizes and they grip a geared wheel. And they basically make it so that one hand can go one way. There's a little pulse. It looks like a little pinchers or something right there that I'm taking off. And they go on that little wheel sitting on the left-hand side, and they just grip the side of it. And what they do is they sort of creep their way up the side of it, but they can only go one way because of the way that those hands are shaped. It's really, really cool design, and it works beautifully. That's it, by the way. That's the whole design on the automatic works. And as you can see, here's the entire watch disassembled and laid out for you. Actually, quite a few parts in one of these. These are no joke. There's a lot going on in there. I mean, it's not a chronograph, but, you know, calendar plus automatic does add up. So now it's time to get everything into the watch cleaning machine. As you can see, I use these little tiny baskets, and then the bigger stuff goes in these mesh baskets that are already built in, and there we go. When I took it out of the watch cleaning machine, though, something happened. And as you can see, that mainspring broke. This is the end of the mainspring, and it probably got weakened when I accidentally let it come apart all at once. So that really was bad. And maybe it already had some kinks or damage on it to start with. At any rate, I had to order a new mainspring. Good news though, A, I was able to find one easily, and B, the barrel cleaned up very nicely. No more of that grease in there, although you can see where there was some wear on the inside of the top of the barrel, and that also could have contributed to the fatigue of the spring that would lead it to break. And again, me letting it fly out of that barrel probably didn't help. So these mainsprings come with one side painted, and that's the top part. And all you have to do, it's quite easy. They make it really easy on you. Is you take the mainspring in this metal disc, you take the painted part, no matter what color it is. In this case, it's actually silver. That's up, and then you just hold it over the barrel. It'll sit right in, and then you can just use your tweezers to gently push the mainspring in, and that's it. And it makes it really easy, and it's actually even quicker than using the mainspring winders or any other way to put them in. So easy job. Done this a lot of times before. Or you might think I had done this a lot of times before, because guess what? It just came out of the stupid barrel again. So now I do actually have to use the mainspring winders to get it back in. And yeah, man, I'm still learning. And so this is some of the stuff that you have to face down when you're learning. The good news is I have the right tool to get it wound back in, and then I can click it right back in with that really satisfying click sound and get back underway with the build. But yeah, having some mainspring problems with this this rebuild apparently. So now we get to put the arbor back in. And we'll put a little bit of 1300 on the top of that because it does rotate before putting the barrel lid on. And these fit like the Swiss ones. You just click them into place with pressure. And that means that we can get started again on the movement. So that means that the same thing I did when I very first started the movement, I'm going to do here, which is I'm going to take the balance off so that it's not hanging around or in the way as we rebuild the watch. And I'll put that on last because that's the last part that we need to put on. So that center wheel under there, and then the barrel. And now I'll put on the click. I remembered that the click was actually under that bridge, so I want to make sure that I put it on ahead of time. And now we can get the escape wheel in place. And I guess I can go ahead and put the pallet forks on now as well. I remembered that I had taken those off around this time. Now, normally I don't put those on until later, but there's like a smaller bridge and then the big bridge that all kind of go on top of it. So I figured, well, I should probably put them on now before I put on those other ones on top. And again, this is me kind of sorting out as I go and remembering how it was when I took these apart. So there's a pallet fork bridge coming in. course, one wants to be very gentle with this part. And I'll even use a little stick here just to hold down that bridge, because if the pivots on that pallet, those pivots and the ones on the balance are the thinnest and they're the easiest to break. And again, I'm going to use this little stick just to hold it in place while I screw down, just in case like me pushing on the side of the bridge with a screwdriver upsets it, and then I screw it down and it can snap. So this is that little bridge that I mentioned before, just for that center wheel. And I'm just getting a little bit of lubrication here. And then also another one thing I didn't want to forget is this. And once again, this is the hack. This is what stops the movement when you pull the crown out. Not every watch has that. It's a feature. But again, it's common on military watches or watches that really require precision out in the field. Again, this isn't technically a military watch. It's just a diver watch, but it does get used for that. So now the other two wheels can go into place. And then I realize that this click is actually in the way. And I need to take it off. And again, this is just working on a movement for the first time and getting through the kind of bumps in the road, right? Where I'm like, oh, this actually does go on after. I can't put it on first because there's actually a lip on this bridge that would push down part of it, and it needs to go on after. But no big deal. And again, I'm manipulating the bridge as well as the barrel here because I need to get all of the pivots lined up. And when I can push that barrel and they'll spin, then I know that the pivots are in their right holes. And now I'm also looking and going, hold on a second. I actually can put on these pallet forks after the fact, and they don't need to be on, because here's the problem. If I try to make the wheels spin, they can't, because they're connected to the pallet fork, which has a locking jewel, which holds them in place, which is its entire job. But it also means that I can't tell if these things are engaged properly or not, because I need to be able to turn the barrel so that I can see the train of wheels spinning when the bridge is on. So again, it's another one of those things where, you kind of sort it out as you go. And I had made some assumptions about needing to put these on in different order, and I didn't need to. I could actually do it basically how I would do a Swiss watch, as it turns out. Now I can put this click on, and if you look very closely at the very tip, it actually sits on top of that little lip on the bridge, and that's the part that I couldn't put the bridge over. So there we go, just like that. Good. Okay, so let's get this automatic works reassembled now. And as you can see, I already have the gear kind of being clamped, being held by those two pawls. And so I'm just trying to delicately get the jewel at the base of those pawls onto its post without having that little gear come off. That's my goal here. And that needs to go in its pivot hole as well. And then there's this plate that covers them. Calling this a bridge might be a bit much, but a plate or a bridge to kind of hold everything down. It's very thin. All right. Also need to make sure that we do any lubrication on this piece, which goes on the pawls themselves, because they actually do rub against the metal of the gear and increases their efficiency, as well as the little jewel that holds it on. Now I can put the ratchet wheel on. All right, and that means that we can flip this thing over and start getting rolling on the other side. So I'll start off with the cannon pinion, using a little bit of grease here. Unfortunately, there's no great tool, at least that I have, to put these back on, although I guess I could use the staking set that I have for it, but that seems a bit of overkill for such a quick job, so I just do it that way. This is the sliding clutch now, and I'm trying to get some grease on the end of it, but it kind of wants to fall off. Perhaps putting it on the movement wasn't the best spot, but the honest truth is I wanted you to be able to see it. And if I do it off camera, then you can't. That's why I hold the parts right next to the movement like this as well. When I'm like this one, like the stem, when I'm putting the grease on the stem. I got to include you, right? I mean, you're hanging out with me, helping me get through this thing. You got to see what's going on. All right, here is the setting lever now. Again, super easy to put this on because there's no screw on the bottom. And I can get on with the yoke and the yoke spring after that. One little tricky bit that I have to keep in mind too is the hack is, see where the yoke is right now, that long white metal part that I just installed? Opposite that on the other side is where the gold part of the hack sits. And it actually sits in the same groove on the sliding clutch that this yoke sits. And that way it knows whether it's being pulled forward or back, and that's how it stops the movement. So when I put the sliding clutch in, I had to be really careful to make sure that it engaged with the hack on the other side as well. Again, a little bit of grease at the contact points for the spring there. And now I can put the setting lever spring on. And we are getting right through this this build. And I have to say, very, very, very impressed by the design of this movement. Really, some of the innovations that are in this are super, super clever. And even for somebody like me who doesn't do this professionally, I have been able to put this movement back together pretty well. Yeah, I had a few hiccups, that I expect to have. But for the most part, even when I did something out of order, it was just a matter of taking it off and then putting it back on at the right time. It has not been one of those movements where you're just going, I have no idea what they were thinking here. Like, this was built to be serviced. You just know it when you see it, when you work on watches, and this one definitely has that characteristic. Very impressed by this. They usually call these workhorse movements, or movements that are just designed to be ran and ran and ran forever. And I mean, that's exactly what you have here. Very robust. I can see why people love these Seikos. I think this is the only Seiko I have in my collection, though. There's that plastic part. I still don't get that. If anybody knows, other than cost cutting, why you would use plastic parts in such a nice watch, you can tell me. But the good news is they apparently use really good plastic because it's held up for 40 years or whatever, almost 50 years, depending on when this one was actually manufactured. One of the last cover plates to go on this side, I've already put on that transmission wheel. And this is a spring that clicks the calendar over. That right there is what pushes on the calendar ring. And then when it gets kind of right to the right point, it goes dink and it clicks back over. So what I need to do is move that spring out of the way and then get the calendar ring on. But it also has to be hooked on the other side. So it's a little tricky because you kind of need two hands to do it. But there we go, just like that. And now I'll go ahead and put this cover plate on. And just get this all lined up. By the way, very astute watchmakers will notice something, which I'll tell you in a minute. First, let's get this cover plate on, though. And now I want to see if the time setting and the calendar are working. The calendar looks like it's working just fine, but what about the time setting? Wait a second. I can't see what the hour wheel is doing because I forgot to put it on. It's sitting right next to my movement holder there. It actually has been sitting there the whole time. And I just forgot to put it over the cannon pinion. So Again, this isn't some major setback, but it's one of those things where you kind of shake your head and go, still learning, still learning. Now we can put this cover back on properly, and you can see the hour wheels even in there this time. And we really are getting to near the finishing stages here of servicing this movement. Hopefully getting this thing back on my wrist, running a little better than it was before. I knew it wasn't keeping amazing time, but I actually didn't realize how bad it was running. I mean, the amplitude was like 133, I think. Pretty low. All right, so now we get to oil the train wheels here, and I'm trying to show you how I do it. It's a little tricky to do under the microscope, but you get the idea here. The hardest part is getting the correct amount in, and I'm kind of hit or miss with that. You know, you don't want to fill up that little cup there. That would be way too much. You want to be able to see that there's oil in it, but not have too much. And it is a very tricky process, even when you do it under a microscope. The hardest part is actually getting enough oil on the thing. I'm also going to go ahead and show you how I put the pallet forks on under the microscope, because it's a little easier to do this way, and I figured you might like to have a look at it, because again, that pivot that you can see is just tiny. So the tricky bit here is you have to get the pivot in the bottom hole, and then you also have to have the pallet fork kind of stand up so that it's lined up with the escape wheel. Now I can bring this bridge in. And then what I'm going to try to do is line up that pivot hole with a jewel on the top before I kind of press it down. And you can see it's almost in there, but it needs to come through that hole before we can tighten it down. So one way you can do it is to manipulate the pallet fork underneath it by maybe pushing on it here a little bit, and there you go. That's what you want to see. Now I can screw that down, which I did, and it is time to put in the balance. Let's see if this thing will run for us again. It should. I mean, this was a running watch before, but yeah, come on. You never really know. And we'll get this screw lined up here. Similar story there. We just want to make sure that the pivots are lined up before we go too crazy with screwing it down. And if I release the hack, there it goes. We have a running watch. So that is, of course, always what we love to see. I did expect it. It was running before I took it apart. I have now taken it apart and oiled it, so it should be running better. One of the last tasks we have here, though, is we need to do what I talked about before. We need to clean the cap jewels on the balance. So that's on the top of the balance and the bottom. And these Seikos have these kind of weird little springs. I can't remember what they're called, but they're these little tri-springs. They have 3 different contact points. And the way that you get them out is you actually turn them and then hope that they don't go flying away. That's kind of, that's what I've been doing. And this one did go flying away. The good news is it just flew down on the bottom of the microscope. No big deal. So now I can take some Rodico to take out the cap jewel, which is actually 2 parts. There's a cap jewel and then a jewel setting. That's the jewel setting that I just took out of the One Dip. One Dip is a solvent we use to clean these parts. And now the cap jewel needs a tiny little droplet of oil. So you can see I'm getting in there with the loop and getting a drop of oil that covers about 30 to 40% of it. And then you can place the setting on it upside down, turn it back over, and boom, put it right back in the watch. Now I need to get the spring back on here as well. And the way to do this, well, I'll be honest, I've only ever seen people do this. So this will be my first attempt at it. But I've seen both Mark over at Watch Repair Channel do it, and I've also seen Mike over at My Retro Watches do it a bunch of times, and he hates doing it. So I was kind of holding my breath here, but let's see how it goes. You basically just turn it. You get one of the spring lips underneath that groove, and then you just turn it gently and carefully. Like that. Yes, yes. A little bit further. Hey, we did it. You know what? I gotta say, not that bad. Yeah, it went flying off on me at first, but it wasn't that bad. But now that I say that, I get to do it again. So this one's on the bottom. And this is actually the same style of spring, but it's even smaller. You can see there's a little bit of dirt under that lip as well. A little bit of Rodico in there to kind of clean it up probably wouldn't hurt. But again, I'm just trying to be very, very careful with these as I haven't worked with these type of springs much before. I'm used to the Swiss style ones, the Inca block or similar. But this gentle turning motion isn't too bad, and it seems fairly logical. And look at me. Look who's getting better at this. No flying springs this time. Just a little bit of Rodico to take out the jewel setting. And actually this time it took the cap jewel off so you get a chance to see what the setting looks like underneath separated from it. And I did the same process of putting that drop of oil on it, and now I can put it back in. And once again, we get to do the little tourney game here with the shock spring. This is done on a microscope, as you can see. And I do that with a lot of these small parts. I really do find that it helps me understand how they work and what I'm doing a little better than using a loupe. Although the microscope can be a little finicky to work on. It does make the tweezers look huge, though. This little tiny spring. Aha. 2 out of 3. Really just trying to take my time with this too and not rush anything. I don't need to bend this or have this one go flying off, so there we go. You know, I think I'm getting the hang of these. Seriously, they're not that bad. Not too bad at all. Okay, now we need to put the automatic works on. So this is what will wind the watch when we're just walking around. And that actually engages with the winding portion of the watch. And then we can put on the winding rotor. Again, this is a weighted rotor that is designed to spin. It's designed to react to gravity easily. That's what its whole job on this planet is. Dead simple construction here as well. Just one screw to hold the thing on. No special tools needed. Nothing. And now I can do a quick test to make sure that it's actually winding the watch when I turn it one way and the other, and it looks like everything's good. So we can get the dial out and start to put that back on. Really is a sweet dial. I mean, yeah, it's not particularly fancy, but it is extremely legible. And has a real kind of style to it. You see this a lot on a lot of Seiko watches have a similar design. So now I'm bringing the calendar just to midnight. You know it's midnight because the calendar turns over. So now I can put the hands on at exactly midnight. And then when midnight happens in real life, the calendar will turn right over at that time. So the hour hand's going to go on first. I'm just using a little hand pressing tool. And then, of course, you always want to check the clearance of it to make sure that it's not hitting anything or scraping. And a little bit of Rodico just to clean up the hands, just in case they get any, just smudges or dirt on them. These ones are very old, so I'm not going to make them look, I'm not going to be polishing them or anything. For a vintage watch like this, I prefer, generally speaking, to keep it original. But I don't mind cleaning up the hand a little bit with Rodico if they've got any little smudges or dirt on them. Okay, the minute hand goes on, we'll give it a quick test, and bang, right at midnight, the calendar turns over, the hands aren't bumping into each other, it looks perfect. Now we can put the seconds hand on. Okay, now we need to get this watch back in the case, so that of course means once again taking the crown out. and the stem. This is a case ring that makes sure that the movement doesn't slip around once it's in the case. When it comes to casing it, I usually like to use a little bit of microfiber cloth and a blower to get any dust or smudges off of the inside of the crystal, because I don't know about you, but they would drive me completely bonkers if there was smudge or dirt on the inside of the crystal. Outside I can clean up no problem. Then I use my casing cushion to put the movement back in. No big deal. And we could put the crown in. Again, one of the huge design elements from this watch is that the crown sits down there at 4 o'clock. And that is just a totally crazy place to put the crown, but it makes it look totally different. And then it has that rounded crown guard and kind of rounded case on it. Again, this is a locking crown. You just give it a little half turn extra and it locks. Now, this is a diver watch, and while I don't take it diving, for multiple reasons. One, I don't dive. Really, I never have, at least, or I guess I have a little bit in my life, but not routinely. But also, they use these big gaskets, right? And again, the other reason is because it's a vintage watch and I don't know if it's waterproof. But I'm just greasing up the gasket there. That's like a silicone grease that kind of lubricates it and makes sure that the gasket is conditioned so that it doesn't get cracks or anything like that. And that means that I can put the case back on. And I'll use this rubber ball. I love this thing. Now, if I want to tighten down the case properly, I'll have to put it back on my case tightener. But for now, I can just tighten it down by hand with that. And then we'll get a strap put on it as well. I've had a few different straps for this. Often I'll wear it on a NATO strap. But I've been wearing it on this nice leather strap for a while now. And I've been enjoying it. It's very comfortable. Again, I've mentioned them before, not a sponsorship or anything, but Boulong and Sons are the straps that I like when I want to get a nice strap, nice mid-range. They're not cheap, but they're not $500 straps, that kind of thing. And there you go. There is the Seiko 6105 Captain Willard, ticking away in all its glory. A beautiful watch and a true tool watch with a lot of history and heritage behind it. And it's a watch I'm proud to own and I really like to wear. Let's see how it does on the time grapher. Hey, that amplitude's much better, up to 200 degrees. I'm not sure if that's great for this or not, but it's certainly better than 133. And as you can see, the line is much better as well. I've got the beat error down to nothing, and the rate -5 to +3 seconds a day. Looks fine to me, and we're done. So this thing can go back on my wrist and back into the outdoors where it belongs. And yeah, that is going to do it for the Seiko 6105 Captain Willard. I absolutely adore this watch. Again, I think it's the only Seiko that I own, but I'm really proud to own it. I highly recommend picking one up if it's in range for you. Look, they're collectible. They even released a new version of this one that's a recreation of it using modern materials. But if it were me, I'd still go with the old faithful, the vintage version. That's going to do it for this one. I want to thank you for taking the time to hang out with me. I really appreciate all the feedback, comments, and everything that you give me. It really has been fun to explore the watch channel and to learn watchmaking with you. If you want to find out more in between videos, you can check out Instagram. I have an Instagram there called wristwatch_revival, where I post in between project updates and photos and stuff like that. So with that, we'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.